Hey everybody, Cameron here with another EA Zoom talk. Today is October the 1st, 2020, and today I'll be talking about Mars, wielding the primal force. So there's so many things to say when I think about Mars, but something about it, right, like in the times that we're in right now, has just brought me deeply to a space of thinking about Mars and what comes out of me supernaturally. And what I mean by supernaturally is not like some cosmic force, but just actually supernatural, which is like kind of the opposite of the way people look at it. And it's like just supernatural. It just comes out of me as a person instinctually, primally, right? Without thinking, without forethought, right? So just exploring that energy of Mars and just looking at different dynamics of it is what we're going to go through. Even if you look at these pictures here, this person has this arrow. He's an archer. He's a hunter, right? And when it comes to something that is primal, it's like in our life, it's primary that we can not necessarily hunt depending on where we're at, but to find food. That is primal because it's primary. And then the Mars energy here as well, with the person going, is cutting ties with something from the past, and moving towards a new future, And in here, I also see this right here is like cutting ties and severing something. And Mars is a lot about that. It's a lot about separation. And we could see it as when we first are born into this reality, we separate from the oceanic womb that is Pisces or our mother or every moment, what we thought we knew, right? We're severing ties with that and engaging in the new moment. So that's the energy of Mars. And I'm just going to talk about a variety of reflections of it, and then also going through each zodiac sign and seeing what Mars might represent in that sign. An open invitation for anybody, specifically when I go through the zodiac signs, if they have anything to add, I would love the perspective and reflections. So just an open invitation for that as well. So evoking Mars. When I think of evoking Mars, I always think of the color red to begin with, right? It has that fiery energy and the planet has it, right? Even on this planet, there's like scars. There's like a big scar on the planet when you actually look at it, so that's really interesting. And just sitting down with the color red and allowing that to move you, like, what does that feel like to you? And then going back to like hunter-gatherers times, that to me, like things like that evoke Mars energy in me. I've been thinking about crawling around and stuff like that. I'm going to get to that later as well. Also evoking Mars, this person is like a blacksmith, right? And when I think of Mars, I think about just how much energy does it take to create something from nothing? And that takes so much energy to bring forth something new, to birth something. Think about someone when they're giving birth, right? Or when you're trying to create a new space in reality in the form of a job that has never been. You're pioneering that. How much energy does it take to create that, right? And then I also think about just people who are like have a sense of athleticism to them, and or somebody who's doing athletic events or activities, and also just like movement, because something that I feel like we've forgotten is that being a human, we need to move. And that's just super important. And I think that goes with Mars a lot because it is primal that we know how to move and such. So before we get into everything, I wanted to just take a second to, especially since the times that we're in right now, and Mars is retrograde currently, and I have been working with a lot of people who tend towards feeling very tired right now, very tired. And they're tired from a variety of different reasons, but this right here is just a practice we're going to do for like 2 minutes. It's just ujjayi breathing, and it's just literally, I'll talk about it in a second, but it's heating the self from within. So when we're feeling like we don't have the vital force inside of ourselves, how are we taking the time in our day to be able to learn how to build that up, right? And not to say that the ujjayi breath is going to necessarily give you all the vital force that you need to do what you need to do. If you've been tired over a long period of time, but doing this practice throughout the day and over time can ignite that fire, kind of like this right here, right? It's like just creating that fire in your body. And I also think of like these numbers back here. It's like through doing this breath, it creates the information and the data needed to create more vitality. So essentially with this breath, you just sit up, make sure the spine is straight. And they say that the breath should sound like a soothing ocean, right? But I often invite people to begin with their mouth open, but it will end up being closed. So you're just going to breathe in, and then make the noise. Breathe in, and then if you want to take this further, you can close your mouth, and this begins to build up the energy even more. So it'll sound like this, and you're going to make the same noise that we made before, but your mouth will be closed. So it'll be like, and if you want to take this another step further, you can bring the neck in and gently close your eyes and just breathe deeply. Breathe in. Continue the breath. If you can, maybe imagine small little fires being ignited in your body, in your cells, in the area of your solar plexus, wherever in your body you might feel like you were lacking vitality. Just another 40 seconds here. Next inhale, take a deep in breath. Hold for 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. And exhale. Maybe move your body around a little bit. Check in with how you feel. And throughout the rest of this talk, try to find a space of stillness from within your body, even if there's a lot going on around you, even if you have to be very active after this talk, right? Something that's been really important that's coming up for me is like, there's a lot of things that are happening right now where it takes action, but we don't have to take action and burn ourselves out or use excessive amount of energy. So we just have to be mindful of that. So even when we are very active, to find stillness within the activity as well. So yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about Mars as a malefic, because this is something that I've been attuning to through learning a little bit about traditional astrology, but it weaves back into my practice of evolutionary astrology so beautifully that I just want to share the perspective and invite people into a different lens of or an orientation towards think of Mars as a malefic. So the first thing I want to talk about is destruction is creation. So we have to be mindful in this reality creation is we create through destroying or breaking things down, and we also create through building things up. And that's just really important to understand when we think of, or when we use the context of Mars as a malefic, and not just putting our lens of judgment on it as a quote malefic as a bad thing, but it's really just something that is breaking something down or tearing it apart. It can manifest in certain ways in someone's subjective experience as being subjectively negative, but that's not what it's really about underneath it all from my lens. And we can think of that as catabolism, right? So when we eat food, let's hope that we have a malefic force that is Mars that can break that food down. When we eat food, it needs to be broken down because we're creating the prelude to the building up. And in this quote here, I just love it so much. Every act of creation is first an act of destruction. And we can even see that as when I'm going to create something new, that means I have to destroy what I was doing before. And it's just that simple. Destruction and building go together, and both of them are creation. So just keeping that in mind when we are hearing that lens of what we call malefic, and allowing that to actually deepen and enrichen our astrology through understanding that as a process that can be seen through natural law. And maybe not necessarily from my lens, at least always from the perspective of traditional astrology. And I say that because sometimes those things are shrouded in a conditioning that I just don't align with and I don't agree with fully. And then also think of it as Mars is a malefic because it's intemperate heat, right? It's so like the heat is so strong and it's so hot that things can't necessarily survive there, or very few things can survive. Think about the most extreme amount of heat, the hottest places on the planet. Things tend to not grow there. It's not necessarily life-giving to have intemperate heat. It's just excessive, and it's very extreme. And then also negating and saying no. This is something that is super important when it comes to the Mars energy. And that is a negating energy. And that is sometimes from other people's perspective, we might be viewed as malefic when we cut things off, when we act on our instinctual desires. So it's important to see it from that lens as well. And I love this quote here. It says, learn the art of saying no. Don't lie. Don't make excuses. Don't over-explain yourself. Just simply decline. So it's literally like something happens, somebody invites me to do something, somebody wants me to do something. No. I can instinctually feel that what they're saying might make me feel entrapped. And it might be the smallest amount of entrapment, as far as like, I feel entrapped when you want me to go to your parents' house tomorrow because I had something that I wanted to do that had to do with my independence. And that's very small, right? But it also could do with really big things, like somebody actually trying to like oppress you or someone trying to control you. So it's important to know that that's a part of the functioning that we need to live within when it comes to Mars. We need to learn how to cut things off. We need to sever ties with things. So it's just important in the lens to see through. And then here I'm like comparing and contrasting traditional astrology to evolutionary astrology. And so in traditional astrology, they say a lot of times the significations for Mars is to cut or sever, to burn. It has to do with metal. It has to do with heat that utilizing heat to transform things. It has to do with people who tend towards, we perceive as somebody who like might have like a strong build to them, or are very physically oriented. So that's athletics, military, things that have to do with the military and soldiers. Also surgeons, what has to going back to like cutting and severing things, and also having to do with accidents. In evolutionary astrology, we see it as survival instinct. We see it as instinctual desire. And that's like a desire. And when I say instinctual desire, it's just a desire that comes up and is acted upon with no forethought. And it also has to do with initiating action. It has to do with the warrior archetype, which kind of actually goes back to the athletics, the military, and the soldiers as well. And it has to do with the continued state of becoming. So the way I perceive continued state of becoming is like in every single moment, we're birthing something new. Every single moment. And that goes with the moment-to-moment consciousness. And since we're in a continued state of becoming, And since Mars has to do with the moment-to-moment consciousness, I invite everyone to see it as a trial and error process. When you're trying to start something new, when you're birthing something, a trial and error process is necessary in order for you to make it to where you're going. And I specifically say trial and error process because a lot of times in our conditioning, in our reality, we have a perception that we should already know things or we should have things figured out. So even if you just took a moment to see where Mars is at in your birth chart and seeing it from a lens of that's wherever it's at by house and sign, that is where you're experiencing a trial and error process through learning. So if anyone has, no matter where your Mars is at, wherever it is this like an open invitation to discontinue judging that placement as not being where it should be. Because when you're a baby, if you fall, you just get back up. You don't judge it. If you do judge it, you're wasting your time and you're wasting your energy. And I'm not faulting you or judging you if you do that, but that's just the way it is, right? You be using your energy on being upset about something or feeling like you don't have enough when you could instead get up and keep it moving. So that's just an open invitation. And evolutionary astrology is also correlated with freedom, like the necessary freedom to act. So just going back to instinctual desire with no forethought and just acting, just initiating acting without forethought, which I always invite people also to see that through having no forethought, you will begin to just understand how you want to initiate action. So there is some sort of self-centeredness or not considering of others when in this process. And if you didn't have the opportunity to do that when you were younger, then that could be the actual reason why you're engaging in that process. So that's something to think about, especially from an evolutionary astrology perspective and connecting it with traditional astrology. When we talk about cutting and severing, in evolutionary astrology, it is said that essentially the way that I digested it, at least, I'll say, is that it's as if from the past, wherever someone's Mars placement is at, it's as if they couldn't act on that energy and they felt entrapped in that archetype. So now they incarnate with the Mars in that placement in order to move forward, in order to initiate action within that space. Naturally, when we initiate action in any space, energetically within our chart, based off where it is in your chart, where your Mars is at in your chart, there will be necessary conflict. There will be necessary oppression or repression, or you're just coming up against other things. And that is actually, from my perspective, I see it as an invitation to keep going, moving forward. Whereas some people might take it as an invitation to back off or an invitation to not move in the way that you instinctually know you should move. And that's important because if you can't and don't move in the way that you feel like you should move, then that creates other issues like adrenal gland issues and then just feeling like uncomfortable in our bodies. But I'm going to move forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Mars as a lower octave of Pluto. And we see here, we have desire. And the way that I look at this person reaching their hand out is like Mars energy. They're just instinctually, they feel like they want to go in a direction and they're going there, right? And then, but unconsciously, unknowingly, somewhere in the background, there's a desire that is larger and bigger than the actual hand reach out, right? It's like, I want to do this right now, but unconsciously, we don't know there's something else that's deeper. And the unconscious desire that is the Pluto realm is the thing that I would perceive to be out here. Whatever is the unconscious desire is what we're really, really, really going for. Whereas in this moment, we're just acting out in that desire. And the more that we can connect those two, the faster that I feel like we can evolve on some level, you know, or at least evolve in a way that we can take direct action and be mindful, right? So I'm gonna talk a little bit about Mars in the human anatomy. So when it comes to Mars corresponds directly to the adrenal glands, and it also, like in evolutionary astrology, corresponds to survival instinct, and the adrenal glands correspond to the fight or flight mechanism. And that could be, and so anytime we feel entrapped, right, we could go into adrenal excess and feel like we're in a fight or flight situation. And that's really important because I perceived this year so many people have gone into that state of being when there was not truly a source that was coming in to actually give it, like, make us feel like, or not necessarily make us feel like, there was not something that was actually threatening our lives. That's what I'll say. There weren't actually circumstances that were threatening our lives, but we were still acting as if we were in fight or flight response. So many people will be watching the news and then they would experience reality as, oh no, like I'm getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger. And I always like to use that one because it just lands, right? Mars also corresponds to the blood and how the energy is moving throughout the body. In the way the blood moves, I often have seen within people who have like cold hands or feet, or they just don't have the volume of blood that is desirable necessarily. It's like desirable that is necessary for courage, right? So sometimes when people get cold hands and feet, they oftentimes also have struggles and issues with courage, which also corresponds to Mars. So that's something to think about as well. And then also iron moving through the blood, and Mars rules iron. And then also Mars rules over inflammation, right? So even going back to the traditional astrology perspective, when we say Mars burns things, right? It's like inflammation is normally created through acidosis, and the acids burn. That's what they do. And that's what creates the inflammation. So Mars and primal movement. So this is really important, I feel, for people to understand. We are humans first. And since we are humans, we have to be movers. So we're humans first, movers seconds, and then specialists third. So just this concept or idea is really about how can you move your body? How do you instinctually act out in the world that isn't layered over by conditioning? Because we can become specialists, like I can become an astrologer, I can become an accountant, but on a primary level, and that's what I mean by primal movement. How is the human anatomy created? How is it made? What kind of movements is it supposed to make? Because the human body is not created anatomically to sit in a chair for 8 hours, right? And the more that we do things that aren't in our instinctual nature as humans, as a species, then our health will continue to degrade in some way. So we have to be very mindful of that, right? We are movers before we're astrologers. We are movers before we are accountants, or whatever it is. It's necessary to keep the human anatomy energetically vibrant. Movement is necessary. And that could be movement in a lot of different ways, right? And even being mindful that movement is actually always happening within us in a primal way, like so primal and primary that we don't even have to be conscious of it. The movement is occurring, the blood's flowing, we're breathing, things like that are important to remember. So even movement, for maybe people who are potentially more physically have more physical limitations and restrictions, that could be type of breathing exercise. You're still getting movement, or you're getting your blood to move, or your breath is moving. So just being mindful of that. And also with Mars wielding the primal force, I think of martial arts. And in martial arts, we learn how to use our Martian energy, right? How to direct it properly. Because a lot of times when it comes to like Mars and Aries or energies that are Martian, people are always go, 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 go. But we have to be mindful that the Mars energy tends towards not being sustainable if we're utilizing it in that way. So when it comes to the ideas and the philosophy of martial arts, it teaches us how to find a way to become more still and find out what we want to do, right? It's like, what is our desire, right? Figuring that out. So when we do use our energy, we use it properly. We just, we use it in bursts, and then we come back to stillness. because Mars doesn't necessarily have to be go, go, go all the time. It can be long bouts of being still and then instinctually acting when the time is appropriate. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't be go, go, go or not. I'm just inviting people into a larger spectrum of possibility, because I've just heard people interpret Mars, specifically like Mars and Aries and stuff like that, as like go, 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 and you're doing a lot of stuff. And yeah, I've seen a lot of people get burnt out because of it. So just inviting people into a new perspective. And then Mars also can represent anger. And anger oftentimes is a response to feeling entrapped or repressed. And Mars needs freedom. And when it doesn't have the freedom, that's when it gets angry. That's when it gets angry. So we just have to be mindful of that. And then even right now with Capricorn squaring Mars, a lot of Capricorn planets squaring Mars, and a lot of people feeling repressed, restricted, limited in a lot of different ways, whether that's systemically or whether that's being confined to a certain space and feeling like you don't have the freedom to travel, or you don't feel like you have the freedom to see your loved ones and such like that. Then anger can come up from that. And not an invitation to look away from the anger, but definitely an invitation to engage with it in a way that is healthy, which could look a lot of different ways. And then also burnout. Burnout is a big thing when it comes to Mars. I was speaking on that earlier, and this also has to do with like anger. I've known a lot of people in the last few months who are really on the go. And I mean, I talked about the go, go, go energy, but it also is like having like a lot of anger, like wanting to do something about what's going on. And just even right now, like the way I'm talking, you know, I've interacted with a lot of people who have that energy, and it can burn you out. It can use all your juice. I mean, even if you just think of this battery and this person, like there's only a certain amount you can do before you tap out and you get on 0%. So being mindful that it is a time for new things to occur. And also we don't want to use all of our energy right now and burn out, because I feel deeply that everything that's happening now, if we are trying to birth something new, it should be for the long haul. And I don't always like saying should, but I think it should be for the long haul. And if it's for the long haul, then it's ideal if we don't all get caught up in what's happening right now in this moment and getting into the fight or flight stage, because that actually will drain us. That will actually drain us. So we need to reconsider, rethink, right? Mars retrograde right now. Reconsider, rethink how we're using our energy so that we can do it in a way that is sustainable, that is going to create new change. So Mars and sexuality and creativity. So, well, I want to address this right here first, because I was thinking about it a little bit. And this right here doesn't necessarily represent a man and a woman, but when it comes to Mars, its counterpart from my lens is Venus, because a giver needs a receiver, right? A giver needs a receiver. So just thinking of creativity in that way, and obviously we know what that means as far as sexuality. When it comes to creativity, like if we have an internal desire that we value, that is the way that we act out Mars, right? The internal reflection, the internal desire could be Venus. It's like, I value this because I need to survive. And then once we get past survival, it's like, I value learning, so I'm going to go out and get a bunch of courses, right? Which would be the Mars energy. So that's the creativity. And both those things, from my lens, I would invite people to learn how to fuse those energy, even going into Jeffrey Wolf Green's Pluto Volume 2, and just like looking at the phasal relationships between those two can do a lot if you sit with that and sit with your chart. So just open invitation there. And this right here, this picture right here is just like, yeah, just creativity in this. And I felt sexuality and creativity in this picture, especially because the way that I've been looking at sexuality and creativity, or I actually fuse them together, it's like that doesn't have to be just primal in like our root chakra, kind of like embodied, kind of physical, trying to act it out kind of way. That can be in the heart space. That could be in the mind, or not the mind, in the brain. So sexuality and creativity can be in all those places, right? And just those two things just merging together is just a representation of this picture and just coming together, you know. And let's talk about Mars through the signs. So Mars in Aries. Mars in Aries brings an energy of necessary self-centeredness. It brings also a narcissistic orientation. And I don't mean narcissistic personality disorder. So open invitation for everybody to learn how to split those things apart, and knowing when having a well-informed sense of narcissism can actually be helpful for people, especially if they come from an environment where they were never taught to have a centered or like, a centered self-centeredness. If no one has ever taught that, then they might in their process need to learn how to do that, which a Mars and Aries person will tend towards having that inclination. They also will experience anger from feeling entrapped from external authorities or by feeling judged, right? Because they want to do something instinctually and act on it, but if something from the outside is limiting and containing them, then that represses their freedom and their independence, which they require their independence. It is a must. And I also think that it's really important to see the reflection of how in every single, wherever Mars is at by sign and house, if you know that in someone's chart, right, inviting them to act that out, being an advocate for that person so that they can act it out in a way that is more harmonious and less, not necessarily less destructive, but less destructive in a harmful way, right? So we can be like cheerleaders for these people in order for them to accelerate that process and allow them to have the freedom and the space to do it, especially when a lot of people in our environment might not understand that. So giving that gift to people and also giving that gift to yourself is very, very important. So the soul will be strongly integrated through the body with Mars and Aries. And it's said that it's in its rulership based off traditional astrology. So being in its rulership just means Mars energy and Aries energy, they're similar and they're harmonious. And Mars can just do what it does when it is in the energy of Aries. Instinctually, you know. And that's not going to manifest in everybody's life as them feeling like they can just be free all the time. But that energy will be so present that it will make it to that space. So Mars in Taurus. So with Mars in Taurus, we have people who have the desire to establish their value system and going through a trial and error experience through learning that value system. So a lot of times I meet people with Mars in Taurus and they don't necessarily know what it is that they truly value in their younger years. It takes them time, right? And telling those people it's okay to figure out what you really think is valuable, because then you also can know if you're trying to learn what is valuable, then you don't have to project your self-esteem and your self-worth onto the reality outside of yourself. Because if you project that outside of yourself and you don't know what you truly value, that can create conflict and confusion, and it can put a damper on how you value yourself or your personal self-esteem. So if you know you don't know what you value quite yet, then you never have to compare yourself in a way that is detrimental to your health, right? And that understanding is huge. And I've even worked with some youth and like teaching them that, and it just changed everything. It changed everything. That orientation can change so much. I'm telling you, that orientation can change so much. Yeah. So Mars in Taurus also is about like trying to find a sustained focus that becomes, it's highlighted with this placement, to find something that you can focus on and something that is sustainable, because Mars energy isn't necessarily always sustainable. It's just acting out. Like I've said, it can cause burnout as well. So putting Mars in the energy of Taurus is building something and it's taking its time, right? And the Mars energy is like, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. So giving Mars something to, basically when you figure out what you value, you put Mars in that space and you allow it to take its time to get there, right? Allow it to take its time to get there. And with Mars and Taurus, also self-reliance is highlighted. So just figuring out moment to moment to moment how to rely on oneself, not to negate that we need other people, but to just rely on self. And that goes back to accessing self-esteem through learning what we value. And if we know what we value, then we can rely on ourselves to give ourselves what we need. Also with Mars and Taurus, there's a highlighted sense of like needing to be sexually active with the self, right? Like self-reliance in a way of like the sexuality or the creativity is like deeply resonates with self, you know? Not to say, again, not to negate, we need to engage with other people, but it's just a highlight, it's just highlighted there. And then in traditional astrology, it's considered to be in its fall, which essentially Mars always wants to go, 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 or it has the energy of go, or like extremely fast and quick bursts. And Taurus is like, I'm gonna take my time and I'm just gonna relax. So those two things just don't go together. And also being mindful when it comes to, you know, terminology like malefic, benefic, fall, detriment, stuff like that. If we take it out of the lens of just looking at somebody's emotional, psychological complexes and soul level things, if we look at it from just if you look at it from just a molecular level or like a tissue state level, or from the perspective of the physical body, these placements actually do act in a way that is not necessarily ideal. So if Mars is, let's say Mars is metabolism or catabolism and is breaking things down, and Taurus slows things. So what happens to our food when we slow down our catabolism? It doesn't break down. What happens when the food doesn't break down? It stagnates. What happens when it stagnates? We get constipated. So we have to be mindful of like underlying energetics that aren't just behind the conditioning of this terminology. And also an open invitation to take these words, if you ever hear them, and call them something different, you know, just so you can have your own orientation towards them. So Mars in Gemini. Mars in Gemini energy is motivated towards independent thinking. It's the desire to question things instinctually. So if it's questioning things, it can be perceived as argumentative or combative, right? I mean, just think about a parent and it's like, go clean your room. Why do I need to clean my room right now? I instinctually wanted to go explore outside. I was curious about that plant I just saw. I'm curious about gathering information about this bug I'm playing with, right? Just think of like a child, and it's this pure curiosity. And how a parent or another person that you are in relationship with might reflect to you that you're argumentative or combative, when really you're just curious and you might be exploring something and they might be restricting you or limiting you. These are all things to be mindful of. And be mindful of if you know somebody with Mars and Gemini that maybe people tend to judge as if they're scattered or they don't know what they're doing because they're going in a bunch of different places, which, you know, potentially could be an expression of this. And also putting that highlight on it can allow people to be like, oh yeah, I do that sometimes. And also I am gathering a variety and diversity of experiences and a variety and diversity of information so that I can make connections and synthesize those things. When we're going out to synthesize and connect things, we might not always seem like we know what we're doing in the present moment, right? Because it happens later. Yeah. So Mars in Cancer. The desire is to create safety on some level. And what I will say about that is, like, so the way that I like to frame it, when I talk about creating safety, I like to tell people, yes, safety, and also be mindful of what actually is security. And a lot of times there's a difference between safety and security. And the difference for me in the way that I use the languaging is that safety is like us looking for something outside of ourselves to make us feel comfortable and safe. Where security is looking within oneself and trying to find a safe space to be the self, or a safe space to just literally be who you are. Right? Which that is security, even though I'm using the word safety. That will be security to me. And there tends to be a highlight on family, home, close friends as the main orientation of security and or lack thereof. Because a lot of people who are born with Mars in Aries, Mars in Capricorn, in Cancer, they're born into families where projected emotional, like the emotional needs that they project onto their family aren't being met. So since they aren't being met, they might be in this realm for a really long time. They're still like their projected emotional needs weren't met when they were younger. And then they'll go into later on in their life still attempting to find some sense of security through the family, with the home, through the close friends, because they're in their shell still and they never actually got a chance to explore outside of it, right? Which is primal, right? It's primary to build a relationship and find security or safety from within the home and the family before we go out and engage with the world at large, or before we can feel safe and secure and comfortable with the world at large. And Mars in Cancer has a tendency towards, they say a tendency towards jealousy due to misplaced emotions, which a lot of times I just see that as like you're not feeling nurtured enough. So if you're not nurtured enough, you're like, well, why are you giving that person some sense of nurturing, right? Why are you giving them some nourishment? I want that nourishment. I need that. Bring it over here, please. Like, yeah. And Mars and Cancer also desire to be nurtured, and often they often nurture others, and that can lead to burnout, right? Going back to the projected emotional needs, when we project that out, a lot of times what we do is we actually instinctually and habitually go and just nurture other people as a projection of what we desire. And when we're doing that, what we're actually doing a lot of times is leaking our energy, because it's like, I desire to feel held. I desire to feel safe. I desire to feel secure. And I'm projecting that out and giving it to everybody else. Whereas a lot of people might not see that as a problem, and it might not be a problem, but it can be problematic. And it can be, right here, like it says, in detriment, right? Mars being in Cancer is in detriment. Mars wants to act kind of instinctually, right? And also be very self-serving. And it wants to go to something new. When we go to something new, Cancer's like, that's not safe. So Mars instinctually acting out with no forethought, not thinking about safety, and Cancer being about safety, that's how this energy comes together to be in its detriment, right? So Mars in Leo, the desire to take charge and be in control of one's own destiny. Automatically just think about the sun and just like its sovereignty, right? It just literally wants to do what it wants to do, to create whatever it wants to create. Independence is strongly needed here, again, in order to actualize. It needs to be able to instinctually act on what it wants to create or what it feels like it needs to create. And also being mindful that Mars in any of the fire signs is going to have a tendency towards a stronger desire towards independence, right? Because they all the fire signs have a sense of special purpose or destiny, or I can say that Source is lighting a fire in them. And when Source lights a fire in you, you don't need to ask anybody else what you should do, right? You might, but you don't necessarily need to. And it's like an open invitation. If Spirit comes through you and lights that fire in you, you don't even have to think about it. Act on it, right? With the Mars placements being there, just act on it. There's no forethought, right? Again, with that tendency towards self-inflation and self-importance. And I feel like this is super important because in our society, a lot of people come down hard on people who have the tendency to have like narcissistic tendencies. But if someone has Mars in Leo, then this could be necessary. This could be necessary. And I would even say is necessary. You know, it depends how they act on it, but I also would say it is necessary because, like I was saying before, Mars is about severing and cutting ties, right? And what is it severing and cutting ties to in relationship to Mars being in Leo? A time when they couldn't assert themselves, a time when they were feeling potentially small and not important. So then they act in a way that is instinctual, that is severing ties with not feeling good about oneself in some sense, yeah. So, and that might create extra self-inflation. Anyway, desire to access personal will, right, due to some entrapment of actualization in the past. And that's like I was saying, like being able to express oneself and actualize and create, right? Even someone with Mars and Leo might have had a hard time when they were growing up with being validated, their creativity being validated, or what's called the solar inner child. It's like the solar inner child just wants to be seen in every moment. It just has a desire to be explored or attuned to. Yeah, and like I'm saying down here, like don't reinforce selfishness projections onto these people, because they might have already received that, but it's actually an evolutionary necessity on some level. So not saying don't call these people into the experience of understanding what is occurring, but what I am saying is we have enough guilt on the planet. So invite these people to see it from a certain orientation and lens so where they can make adjustments and don't have to be so self-inflated that it's excessive, but also allow them to explore how important they are for themselves. So Mars in Virgo. This is initiation through analysis and adjustments. And being mindful that learning discernment, which the Mars in Virgo I feel like is about strongly. I mean, we all need to learn discernment throughout our life, but Mars in Virgo specifically is like highlighted with learning discernment, and that may be perceived as going through a lot of things that are perceived as crisis. Because when we go through crisis, we make adjustments. When we go through things that we perceive as crisis, we analyze what we should and shouldn't be doing, and we refine our process, right? And we purify as well. So yeah, and going to that, refinement, humility, and purification. It's like engaging in reality and in life in a way where we're just continuously refining things, right? We're purifying and letting go of the things that are creating crisis. And I also put, it's like humiliation can occur here, right? And humiliation would occur in order to enact humility, right? In order to enact humility, which humility a lot of times could be seen as moving from the Leo archetype that is like so self-inflated, right? Sometimes the humiliation of the humility is just like bringing that down to size before we go into the Libra archetype, which would be like the harmony or the balance of those two. So, and it can also represent a need to learn honesty through a trial and error process. And I say here that being of service can distort honesty. So a lot of times I see when people want to be of service so much that they actually aren't being honest with themselves, and they're not severing ties or saying no to people, right? Going back to Mars and it being quote unquote malefic and saying no and negating things. To be of service, we must learn to say no. We must learn to be honest with ourselves and be able to have the discernment to see when somebody actually does and doesn't need our help. And that's something that it takes deep discernment to have. And it also is something that can create crisis, right? When we say no to somebody, and that, but maybe I should have been of service there, right? That's the crisis. And we analyze that and we make adjustments to move forward. And through that process, we refine how we assist and help other people with our light Leo. We make the adjustments and we go out and be of service, Virgo. Yeah. And also I see a highlighted sense of needing to destroy guilt and shame. Like I'm saying, if you say no to somebody, but you feel like, oh, I should be of service, then that a lot of times can bring in guilt and shame. And like I always say, we have enough of that in this reality. So open invitation to attune to that and learn how to let go of it in any way that you see fit. So Mars in Libra, the desire to engage in relationships. And when we engage in these relationships, or when someone engages in these relationships with the Mars in Libra energy, it creates polarization. It creates polarization, which always, like when I talk to people who have highlighted Libra, if they ask me a question, I give them an answer immediately and I watch them. I literally watch them learn what their desire is through the polarization that I am, right? They're one pole, I'm another pole, right? Through that reflection, through that mirror, they're learning what they want to do, what they desire, right? In those extremes, which the extreme of you and I, or self and another, they create evolution through that reflection. And with Mars in Libra, if anyone has that placement, or whenever Mars is transiting through Libra, being mindful to observe the oscillation. So, and what I mean by that is just observing the extremes, right? And allowing ourselves to find a way to find more balance and more harmony in that process, right? If we know that Mars in Libra is coming, if we know that we have Mars in Libra natally, then we can watch ourselves literally go to these extremes. And when we see that, it can accelerate the process of harmony and balance. So, yeah. And cutting of codependency over time. So learning like independence versus interdependence and codependence and how those things are interchanged and related. And also people with Mars and Libra challenge the cultural accepted versions of relationship, right? Whereas I even say cutting off codependency over time is because on some level, the Mars and Libra placement, it doesn't actually go with what is socially accepted as far as relationships go. So you need to cut off the codependency to be able to act on what they think relationships are for themselves. Okay, learn the balance of independence and relationship. A variety of attractions, right? This is a quality of the air signs, especially Gemini and Libra, right? Just like a variety and like exchanging information and that being something that they desire to initiate in. Whereas before in Gemini, it was about Gemini being ruled by Mercury. It's about mental information and mental organization. And here with Mars in Libra, it's about connection because it's ruled by Venus. So a variety of attractions, right? Instead of, or different, and to differentiate a variety of information and data, which would be Gemini. And here again, it's said that it's in its fall. And the way that I perceive that is because Mars energy wants to be selfish and do whatever it wants to do, and Libra wants to be connected and create harmony between itself and another. Those things don't necessarily energetically go together. So it's important to have that reflection, to understand that, so that we don't have such a resistance to it and we can allow ourselves to evolve and attune to that process. So Mars and Scorpio, the desire to penetrate to the deepest desires, to understand the motivation, desire nature, and deep emotional dynamics, the desire to understand the use of power, the desire to understand what is and isn't manipulation, which to me that goes totally back with desire to understand the use of power. And will often come up to like people with it or natally or in transit will often come up to limitations, to forces that are larger than themselves, which initiates somebody into a deeper understanding of spiritual will versus personal will. And knowing that the larger force from my lens is like aligning with the spiritual will in order to enact or initiate what is the deeper unconscious desire. And I say the deepest unconscious desire relative to Mars being the lower octave of Pluto, and this kind of having some sympathetic resonance. Mars and Scorpio having the resonance of Mars and Pluto's relationship. And also the desire to metamorphose through personal inquiry. So that can go back to penetrating to the deepest desires, right? Just always trying to get to the bottom of things, right? Thinking of Scorpio as fixed water. Like, what is fixed in our emotional body, in the conscious desire to continuously engage to get there, right? And this is considered to have Mars in its rulership. And here it's just like the deep determination of the Scorpio energy has some deep resonance with Mars energy. So Mars in Sagittarius, the desire to expand through philosophical means, right? Expanding through learning natural law, through learning religions and different beliefs, right? The desire for adventure, the tendency towards restlessness, which I perceive this one as well as like it's restless because it needs or desires deeply to have this freedom and this independence to figure things out on a larger cosmological, philosophical context. And then also trial and error process, always thinking of Mars, the trial and error process. And then so in Sagittarius, accepting and trusting the intuition. Accepting and trusting intuition. So these people have highlighted experiences of going through a trial and error process. They instinctually know what they intuit and have a tendency towards not acting on it. And they're learning how to do that throughout their process. The desire to understand the connection between the physical and non-physical, right? Which is the philosophical context, and their need to keep it moving and have adventure, right? So the philosophical context is like the non-physical, the idea of it, or the belief. And then the adventure, some part of the Sagittarius energy, the Mars and Sagittarius energy, has to do with the physical aspect of like actually like going on journeys and like going to travel and such and such. The desire for truth and craving to find the courage to just be completely honest, right? So this comes up again with the trial and error, accepting and trusting one's intuition so that they can be honest about it, right? So they can be honest with themselves, so they can attune and tap into their personal truth, which has to do, again, with philosophical meaning, has to do with like your beliefs. That is your personal truth, right? And desire to have life be lighter, right? So just kind of like they tend towards being more humorous or and jovial and keeping things lighthearted. And this, again, to my point, goes back to Mars being in Sagittarius, having an evolutionary process of being lighter due to the fact that the soul from prior lives or before, or the deep self from before, or the person who is experiencing this when in childhood, things tended towards being heavier. So them wanting some levity and some lightness and an expansive quality to their life is just highlighted. Mars in Capricorn, desire to be set free from all inhibitions, restraints, and oppressions, right? The instinctual desire to become one's own authority, to take autonomy over their life and be the personal author of their reality, right? The tendency towards emotional and sexual repression through external authorities. So yeah, again, just feeling restraint, inhibition, oppressed, repressed, suppressed, right? The potential for deep anger due to that repression, right? Anything that's natural and repressed becomes distorted. I'm pretty sure Jeffrey Wolf Green said that. Anything natural and repressed becomes distorted. And since from my perception, we all are born in autonomous beings, right? If the Mars energy is about instinctually engaging in instinctual and initiating action, and Capricorn represents limitations, external authorities, then that will just create like this. I always think of it as like pressing down a beach ball in a pool, right? This desire come out. Autonomous, tendency towards fear of judgment, which goes back to the repression. Desire to understand distortions. So when we are trying to become our own authority in this reality, and Capricorn representing structures and social norms, it's like we're instinctually engaging with these social norms in order to sever ties with them, to get rid of them, to burn them away from our personal process so that we can be the author of our own reality. And I thought this was really interesting that because I actually have experienced this in college, actually, because I have Mars and Capricorn, but the use of alcohol to release inhibitions. So it's like a lot of times people think Capricorns are like really rigid, and they can tend to be, but really actually underneath this rigidity is this desire to just break free. And even it being an earth sign, just to be like very sensual in the body and just enacting in that way. And they say that Mars in Capricorn is exalted here, which is interesting, the exaltation here, because it doesn't necessarily land in the same ways the other ones did for me. Whereas here they say it's exalted because Mars, you know, it can plan things. It could take time. It could take its time in that, you know, creating sustainability, because Capricorn is like limiting how much it can just go, go, go. So Mars in Aquarius, the desire to actualize through detachment from the immediate circumstance. It must be mindful that their process is deeply connected to the difference between, is deeply connected to difference and being different, right? So just taking a step away because one is not inherently like the environment that they are in, right? It learns what it is early through seeing what is not. So it's just learning what it is based off of everybody else not being like it. Again, taking a step back. And when I say detachment here, I mean more non-attachment. So taking a step away and just observing things. And Mars in Aquarius also has to do with upgrading ideas to access personal authenticity, right? So in Mars in Capricorn, we were feeling restricted, but here we're upgrading past that to find our personal authenticity. And it's also initiating through experimentation. And I also can bring that back to Mars in Capricorn, whereas Mars in Capricorn, we're trying to go towards what is how do we can become our own authority. Well, once we become our own authority, we can experiment with things and figure things out moving forward. And also, I give a huge invitation for people who have Mars in Aquarius or when Mars is in Aquarius to check in with triggers and disassociation that can come along with this placement, right? Because Aquarius is having a heightened effect on the nervous system and long-term memory, and Mars being conscious desires and instinctual things. It's like the things from our long-term memory can come in and put us in a fight or flight state in an excessive way. So it's good to be mindful of that. And then with Mars in Pisces, the desire to sever from all desires that are in the unconscious realm. And that's just so huge, right? It's so huge. And it's acting on desire to bring it to culmination, right? So I have all these things in my unconscious that I want to sever ties from, that I want to move away from, that I want to birth something new. So I must get rid and purge all those things from the past, right? They also have a highly charged imagination. So just thinking like Pisces being about the imaginal realm, and then Mars being about vital force and energy. So you're bringing a lot of vital force and energy to the imaginal realm, which to a lot of people may be perceived as naive and unrealistic, can give people the tendency to be ungrounded and their energy being diffusive because they are in the imaginal plane. And it also brings a quality of being out. So Mars in Sagittarius, and everybody, my internet went out real quick, so thank you for bearing with me. But Mars in Sagittarius has to do with a desire to expand through philosophical means, right? A desire for activity and adventure, rather. A tendency towards restlessness, and we're coming here to the trial and error process, right? Thinking about Mars being a trial and error process. In what way? Sagittarius, trusting one's own intuition and following one's personal beliefs, right? Accepting, right? The desire to make the connection between physical and non-physical. And the way that I look at this is like with Mars and Sagittarius energy, it's like it has a desire to expand through things that are philosophical, which is non-physical. And also they have a desire for adventure. So it's like they have that action, they have that dual nature to them, even being like the archer being like half horse and half man. It's like it has these ideas, right? And that's like the human part of us. It's like philosophical, but then the animalistic material part of us wants to actually go out and do things and find adventure. And has a desire for truth, right? And it craves the courage to be completely honest. So the instinctual desire or to instinctually speak one's truth or speak on one's personal beliefs, right? And they also have a desire to have life be like lighter. So they will have a tendency towards being like more humorous or jovial. And from the evolutionary perspective, it said that this is like a necessary evolutionary intention due to the fact that either in a past life, right, or in the deep self, or in childhood, depending on how you want to perceive it, it was the sense of heaviness occurring. So going back to Mars wanting to sever and cut ties from the past to birth something new. I was in something that was dark and heavy, and now I have the desire to cut ties with that and instinctually act in a way that is lighter, right? To birth something new. So Mars in Capricorn, the desire, the instinctual desire to be one's own authority, the desire to be set free from inhibitions, restraints, and oppressions, a tendency towards emotional and sexual oppression through external authorities. So, like I was saying before, Mars in Capricorn wants to be its own authority. So, and also Mars being primal, that has to do with the sexual nature of a being, the primal sexual nature of a being. So when that is being repressed, or when an external authority is saying you shouldn't do this, but you, without forethought, you have the desire to do it, right? That can create distortions. I'm pretty sure Jeff Wolf Green is the one that said anything that's natural and repressed will become distorted, right? Where you can see where the Capricorn energy is at in our reality right now. Also, Mars in Capricorn has a desire to be autonomous and find this natural personal authority. Said that already. And tendency towards fear of judgment, right? When we talk about being our own authority, if we don't feel like we're our own authority internally, then we will be afraid of someone else reflecting to us that we did something wrong, or we shouldn't do this, or we should do that. The desire to understand distortions, right? Because when it comes to an external authority or perceived external authority, it distorts our lens of how we think that we should act, which takes away our personal authorship, which takes away our personal authority in our self-understanding. So the Mars in Capricorn engages in order to sever ties with the distortions of other people's judgments, value judgments, and projections. And I also found it interesting that the Mars in Capricorn person can use alcohol to release the inhibitions. So somewhere deeper in the Mars in Capricorn person is a desire to literally just be free and wild, right? And also was talking about, so in here, Mars is in exaltation in traditional astrology. So this doesn't, I don't know, I'm still figuring this one out for myself, but in traditional astrology, from my understanding, it's Mars energy can tend towards being extreme and burning things out. So being in Capricorn tempers that, right? What I was saying before, Mars represents intemperate heat. Well, if you can contain intemperate heat, right, then you can use that heat to create something, right, that's sustainable. So Mars in Aquarius, the desire to actualize through detachment from the immediate circumstance or the immediate environment. And they do that from my lens because they feel different, right? So if you feel very different from your immediate environment, then there's a desire to take a step away from it to be able to realize in an objective way, like, oh, I'm different. And that's why I want to act in this way over here when everybody else is doing this right here. And it learns early to understand what it is through other people not being what they are, right? Which can also bring a sense of like alienation, can bring a sense of a need for people, a felt need for people to fragment parts of themselves and leave them in different spaces and not act on what is uniquely them because of the contrast of other people. And people with displacement, I often tell them, know that you belong because you are different and you're on the outside looking on the inside. Insides need outsides. And that's how people with heightened Aquarius energy belong, right? It's necessary. Insides need outsides. They both belong in their respective places. So when we can orient in that way, it just helps us in our process. And they initiate through experimentation, right? So with the Mars and Capricorn, they would need to be their own author, their own authority. And once you become your own authority, you can try new stuff out and figure things out. And I invite people with the Mars and Aquarius energy to check in with triggers and disassociation, because Aquarius energy can correspond to the nervous system. And the Mars energy can correspond to the adrenal glands. And also just Mars being an intemperate heat or energy that is excessively stimulating. If we have a overstimulated nervous system, we can have a tendency towards disassociating from our body, right? Even thinking of Mars being primal and in the body, and Aquarius being objective and detached, right? Being detached from our primal body, right? And needing to find techniques to make sure that we can stay in our body. So Mars in Pisces, the desire to sever from all desires that are in an unconscious state, which that's so huge, right? Like all the things that are unconscious, like just trying to sever ties with them so that we can flow into a new direction. Acting on desires to bring a culmination, so bring all those things to an end. And people with Mars and Pisces tend to have a tendency towards having a highly charged imagination. So thinking about how Piscean energy can be a lot about imagination and being in the imaginal realm, and then taking Mars and putting in the imaginal realm, right? Putting energy and vital force into the imagination. And this may be perceived as naive and unrealistic to some people, and it might manifest in that way for people. It can give a tendency towards being ungrounded and just like solely having all one's energy diffused in the imaginal plane, which is ungrounded, right? It is ungrounded. So I would invite people to be mindful of that, because bringing that energy down into the center, whenever you're not in the imaginal realm and not allowing your energy just to be diffusive in that way, can be so helpful in bringing these things that people think aren't possible, or things that people think are unrealistic, to be able to bring them into the current paradigm or the reality that we're in. Because all the energy is there, to pull the energy back to your body is super important. Understand that to imagine can be to act out. So this right here could seem like a lot, right? Like the desire to sever all desires from the unconscious state, right? And knowing that you can just imagine those things. A lot of those things can just be imagined. They don't actually have to be acted out, or we don't have to go through a trial and error process in a physical way. We can do it in the imaginal way. So that could be the gift of the Mars and Pisces. And it's the ego learning that the personal will must align with the higher will. Again, like in Scorpio, right? Aligning that personal will with the higher will. And in this way, this one, from my perspective, has to do with surrendering, right? So with Mars and Scorpio, we came up against a force that was larger than ourselves. And when it gets to Mars and Pisces, we must surrender to the truth of that higher will. And then also the Mars and Pisces, understand that escapism is due to a sense of alienation. So when we don't feel like we are here and we belong here, and we feel alienated, then we want to escape and put our energy somewhere else. So that's just really important to remember. So so I'm going to leave it there, and open invitation for anybody for perspectives and reflections on how you're feeling today, what you thought about the talk. If you have anything to add, just open invitation for reflection and questions as well.
Cameron.
Yes.
We probably would have had more reflections and Q&A, etc., but we've run out of time.
Okay.
We've got the next speaker waiting. So thank you very much for an excellent meeting. And would you all please unmute and thank Cameron Allen.
Thank you, Cameron. I look forward to listening to the whole thing. I had a message to do, so I had to miss, but this is just excellent. Thank you.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Cameron. Yeah, I thought it was great. Looking forward to seeing it again.
Really great.
Thank you.
Appreciate it so much, Cameron. Bye for now.
Yeah. Take care.